I am Dr. Chanel Concepcion, and for this session, we are going to talk about Chapter 3 of your research proposal, which is the methodology. So the research methodology provides practical details of the sequence process involved in answering your research question. A well-designed research proposal should be written in such a way that a person who is unfamiliar with your research would pick up the proposal and be able to understand your study and maybe repeat the study. So each research methodology is, maybe you can call it like a recipe that a researcher should follow. So what we want to achieve in this session is for us to explain the requirements of Chapter 3, the methodology of your research proposal, and also to discuss the importance of articulating the study's methodology. The research methodology are the controls in the study which dictates the acquisition of your data and arranges it in a logical relationship. So this also includes all the techniques and methods which are employed by the researcher in a research process so that you can find solution to the research problem. So the research methodology of any research would describe the research method, the approaches, the design, and details can include, all the specifics of how you're going to do the study or conduct the study. It also highlights justifying the choice through describing the advantages and disadvantages of the approach that you have used and the design taken into account their practical and applicability in your research. Chapter 3, methodology. This is the format that was given to you. And of course, your methodology could be quantitative research or qualitative research. So these are the requirements that you're supposed to have in quantitative research and qualitative research on the other hand. It looks like it's very similar, but there are differences according to the approach, which we will detail in the following slides. This chapter is one of the most important part of the research proposal because it allows the reader to evaluate the validity of your study, the rigor, if it's quantitative research, validity and reliability of your study. For qualitative research, it looks at the trustworthiness of your research. So it also convinces the readers that the research design and the method of analysis correctly addresses the research problem. Also, this is where you can demonstrate that the methodology and the sources that you have chosen are appropriate for the specific topic that you are researching. So the objective here is to really kind of connect your aim to the methods that you're using so that you can answer those questions, research questions, and meet the aim of your study. Many people use method and methodology interchangeably, but they actually are distinct from each other. And here are a few differences. The research method, you are looking at specific method that you use to collect the data, to conduct the data in a particular research topic. Whereas the methodology is kind of a broader sense. It looks at the systematic approach to solve the research problem and to reach a new conclusion. The method objective here is to find the solution, whereas the methodology, the objective of the research methodology is to determine the solution by applying correct procedures for the research. If you go back to research method, you're looking at how to apply. Usually this is applied during the later stage of the research process, whereas the methodology from the very beginning, you have determined that this is the methodology you're going to use. And you kind of, sometimes you may change it, but this is kind of the guide that you will have throughout your study. The methodology should be unmistakably tied to the specific aims of your study. That means the methodology that you have chosen should be suitable formula to answer your research question. So in this section, the methods and sources used to conduct the research must be discussed, including the specific references to the site, databases, key texts, and authors, and that will be an indispensable part of the project. The research design details the program in which you can conduct or you will conduct your study in an orderly manner through the proper use of your research resources. So it is like a blueprint. When you're building a house, this is a blueprint that you will have to use which guides you in conducting your research project. So this is also a carefully planned formula, and it outlines the steps of selecting the research methodology. So here you have to be very clear to the reader the research design of your study. So if, for example, you're using an experimental study, you have to make sure you say what kind of experimental study this research is. For example, if it's a descriptive study, you also need to be more detailed about what kind of descriptive study this is. So in simple words, this is the general plan of how you will go about with your research. This table shows us the key research design features in quantitative studies. So for example, in this first column are the features, and then you have the key questions, and in the third column would give you some design options. For example, if the feature is an intervention, your key question would be, will there be an intervention and what does it entail? So your design options here would be experimental study, or it could be a quasi-experimental if you don't do randomization, or non-experimental, or observational design. So you're looking at, for example, if it's a controlled study, what will be the variables, how will you match it, homogeneity, blocking, all those kinds of things. So you can find this table in your Pollitt and Beck 11th edition. This is an example of a research method and design, a quantitative study. For example, it says here, an experimental method will be used to answer the proposed research question. On beginning labor, an activity monitor will be taped, and so on and so forth. So it's just detailing how this research will be conducted, how the data will be collected, and what are the instruments that will be used, what are the, maybe later on you can look at how the data will be processed. So you can see here in the second part, it says a quantitative method has been selected since numeric scores are attached to the measuring tools. And then down here you can look, you can see that it's concerned with significant or insignificant differences between groups. So this is really a detailing what this research design, what the research design is all about. It's also very important that you identify the research environment. Sometimes people would say it's research location or site, or some use the word setting. That is okay too. What you need to describe here is how did you select the site or the location of your research? And the other thing is how you gain access to the site. Okay? Does the site have people with, behaviors, experiences, or characteristic of the research study of interest? Are there just one site or are there multiple sites? So if you talk about a certain province, for example, or a certain district, you should be able to articulate the limitations of your research setting or your site. So another important thing is for you to detail the respondents and sampling. Okay, your choice of population should describe what is your sampling method, and we already talked about different sampling methods, inclusion and exclusion criteria, what the age, the absence of diseases, for example, or are they able to speak English, and so on and so forth. The method of recruitment should be declared, and you have to justify it. In quantitative studies, you may need to have power analysis. Not all will probably need it. And also describe the sampling technique that is used. Your research instrument should also be described. So the details of data collection instrument intended for use if it's studied, are you going to use medical records, questionnaires, interviews, observation? Are there equipment or apparatus that you need to use? So you will have to describe how they will be used. Of course, again, you have to explain and justify your choices. And if you're using a new tool, you have to demonstrate the validity and reliability of that tool. So this is just an example of a measure tool. For example, the length of first stage will be recorded through a parthogram and numerical value of time. For example, down here you have the pain. Maybe you're going to use a Wong-Baker's pain scale and all these kinds of Likert scale and the like. So these are just examples. You also need to detail the data collection procedure. Okay, so what are your approaches? What are the data sources that you would use? So these are some of the common approaches. Are you going self-reports? Maybe these are questionnaires that you're going to send out. So how will you collect that data? And how will you distribute the questionnaires? Okay. Um, Maybe your approach is observation. How exactly are you going to do it? So you have to be very clear and explaining. Is it biophysical measures? What are you going to use? How are you going to get this? So you'll have to detail the type and amount of data that you're collected. And of course, you want to get as much data as you can, but you have to be mindful about minimizing participant burden. Now, the data analysis procedure, here you will have to tell the readers about how you intend to process the data and how you're going to analyze it. Are you going to use SPSS software, or what other special software or ways of processing your data? Are you going to use descriptive statistics or inferential statistics? So what comparisons will be made, if there are any? Would you compare the age, the sex, socioeconomic status, and other demographic data? And project analysis should relate to the aim and the research question cited. So you just don't make analysis just for the sake of it. You have to go back to maybe your hypothesis and the aim of your study. So for example, you will need to use descriptive statistics, because not all measures or not all quantitative studies would be subjected to significant testing or inferential statistics. Maybe you just want to look at the mean, median, mode. These are just descriptive statistics, or dispersion, or association. So these are examples of proposed data processing analysis. For example, if descriptive statistics, you're looking at these scores, maybe you're looking at central tendencies. Participants, for example, will probably look at certain categories like no activity, mild activity, and so on and so forth. For inferential statistics here, you will have to use more um, sophisticated statistical analysis, just like your ANOVA or maybe your chi-square. You're looking at the significance of the p-value, correlation coefficient. If you're looking at reliability of instruments, your Cronbach's alpha, or maybe you need to use factor analysis. So ethical considerations are very important, and we looked at the chapter back in ethics of the research. And if you're going to do a research here in Silliman, you will not be able to continue with your data collection unless you have ethics clearance from the University Research Ethics Committee, UREC. And if you're going to publish or present your paper, the organizers or publishers would always look for your ethical considerations, or if you have ethics clearance. So take special care in ensuring that ethical standards are met. Some of the ethical considerations we discuss are protecting the participants' rights, obtaining informed consent, institutional review process, or ethics committee approval. And you have to make sure you declare any conflicts of interest. So these are the Silliman University UREC, a list for applications, and your advisors will has probably given you this, and make sure that you accomplish this maybe after you finish your colloquium. This will probably happen sometime in January. This is an example of a research-informed consent form, and you will have to fill up the details. And this consent form was provided by the SU UREC, so your advisor could provide this form for you. So let's proceed with the qualitative research methodology and some of the unique features in doing qualitative research methods. It's very similar to the quantitative, but one of the feature that is important here is you have to include the method of inquiry. So there are two parts, general, and the method of inquiry, which is applied. Okay, so in the method of inquiry, for example, you're going to describe the qualitative method that you have chosen. For example, is it phenomenology? Is it ethnography? Or maybe you choose not to have any research tradition to employ in your research study. And the method of inquiry is very similar to what we talked about in the quantitative research. So let's just talk a little bit about the method of inquiry. So here you educate the readers who are not familiar with the method, or even readers who are experts. The purpose here is you're going to translate certain tradition-specific language for the average readers. For example, you talk about phenomenology. There's the term essence. What is embodiment? What are life worlds? Or maybe you talk about epoche or things like that that are very specific to phenomenology, but you need to explain that. Okay. You also need to explain the root um, methodology, for example, phenomenology, what it is, what is the design, will you use the methodology version or tradition, like for example, Merleau-Ponty, are you going to use Van Kam, Van Manen, Monhal? Okay, so you're going to explain it in this section of your research proposal. So in this portion, you will have to include introduction of your method. So if you choose phenomenology, for example, you will have to have an explanation of what phenomenology is. If you're using Van Manen's approach to phenomenology, or maybe Husserlian approach, so you have to be able to explain that. Or maybe you did not choose any particular um, research tradition. You can say you're using descriptive qualitative methodology with no particular disciplinary or methodological roots. But you have to be able to explain or rationalize why you choose this method. And you have to also make sure you go back to the roots of your method. For example, if it's phenomenology, you have to go back to either Husserl or Heidegger. If you talk about, let's say, ethno-nursing, you have to go back to Leininger. Okay, if you talk about grounded theory, maybe you'll have to explain whether you're using Glaser and Strauss, Charmaz, or Corbin, or whatever kind of grounded theory type that you're using. And you have to include the philosophical underpinning of your method and what are the outcomes that you wanted from this research? What are the sources? What are the steps that you employ? The method of inquiry is very applied, is very similar to, like we said in our discussion in quantitative research. But here, I would suggest that you repeat the aim of your study because remember your method and your methodology should address the aim or should answer the aim of your research study. Okay, and then how the actual application of a chosen method will accomplish this aim or these aims. So the method of inquiry applied is very similar. Like we said, the setting, you have to describe what your setting is all about. You will have to also describe the study participants. For example, in phenomenology, when you say phenomenology, the participants should be able to live that experience, not just vicariously, but they live that experience. And of course, you don't probably need too many participants. You will have to do the sampling and use your data saturation as your point where you can say, I have enough and there are no new information coming out. So how will your participants be chosen? This is very crucial and you have to detail that. What is your data collection plan? What is your plan of analysis? For example, there are certain, for example, you use Kalaisi method. Kalaisi method has certain kind of prescribed steps on how you're going to do it. Van Manen has also kind of suggested certain steps. Monhall has suggested stepwise on how to do data analysis. So you have, this has to be aligned with the methodology that, or the research design that you have chosen. Again, ethical considerations. And one of the things that's unique in qualitative research is process consent. You don't probably need to ask your respondents or your participants to um, sign the informed consent, but every time you talk to them, you need to get their consent. Okay, and it's very important to include the measures of rigor. And we talked about different ways to ensure rigor. Very common in qualitative research is Lincoln and Guba, or you can use Monhall. For example, use Lincoln and Guba. Lincoln and Guba has had specific ways or techniques that you could do, you could adapt to ensure rigor. So you will have to detail exactly what you're going to apply in all those suggestions so that you can ensure that your study is trustworthy, it's rigorous, it's credible, and all those different criteria from Lincoln. And you please do not forget your appendices. The appendices are documents that support the proposal and your application. Here you have to put the informed consent. So in your ethics consideration, you will just have to say the informed consent will be given. They make sure that you read them before or give them enough time to read and sign. But the actual informed consent letter, for example, to your participants should be in the appendices. You can just have one sample. You may need to put a Gantt chart, a timeline to see what the activities you will have throughout your research study. This is where you put your interview guide and your questionnaires, all your letters for communicating with the gatekeepers, with the stakeholders, and to the participants. If for quantitative research, you might have measurement tools, you're going to put it there, and some patient information of the study, of course, in layman's language. If you have translated your communication, for example, you also put there a sample in your appendices. Okay, so those are the things that you needed to do, or to the requirements that we expect you to do in your Chapter 3. So if you have any questions, email me or your respective lecturer. Thank you very much and have a good day.